You just don't get it, do you? You don't.
5 million or something. But we've been the COVID safe app. Just I said
Knock, knock.
to
Let me tell you a little story about a man named Even before you start, that was a preemptive Just know I have a whole bag of with your name on it.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a vaccine by the end of the year. We're doing very well with the vaccine. And I will tell you something, I just literally left a meeting. We're mobilizing our military and other forces, but we're mobilizing our military on the basis that we do have a vaccine. You know, it's a massive job to give this vaccine.
everyone should be focused on, Trump followers and others alike, the country as a whole. And that's the fact that he launched this operation to begin with. Because I thought he was supposed to be an outsider, secretly working against the New World Order and working for the people. Oh, really? Then why isn't he not stopping this? Why isn't he launching, say, oh, I don't know, Operation Stop? How about Operation Ban Vax? Operation Cease and Desist? Something other than, you know, getting it out to us, but not only that, getting it out to us as fast as possible, and making sure it happens. I'm sorry. Because I thought that was supposed to be against his character. I thought his character should be, you know, Operation Stop Vax. I thought that was, you know, trusting the plan, draining the swamp, was it not? Now, people are bringing up what he said in the White House press conference, and that he said, yeah, we want to bring it out as fast as possible for those people that want it, and for those people that don't want it, right? So again, continuing this sort of double speak that politicians and presidents are well trained for, okay? The double speak, the tickling the ears, tickling the fancy, tickling the ears of those still on the hook and still hypnotized, okay? Hypnotized by this political bread and circus. The fact of the matter is he launched Warp Speed, end of story.
Grazie Presidente.
Prego.
Hobbes ci diceva che il potere assoluto non nasce con un'imposizione dall'alto, ma dalla scelta di individui che si sentono più protetti rinunciando e concedendo la propria libertà ad un terzo. In virtù di questo, voi proseguite anestetizzando le menti a base di mass media comprati, a mucchina e PNL, con parole come regime, consentire e permettere, fino al punto di permettervi proprio di normare anche i nostri legami e i sentimenti e certificare i nostri affetti. Quindi, in questo senso, la fase 2 non è nient'altro che la prosecuzione della fase 1, si cambia solo il nome, come già avvenuto peraltro per il MES. Abbiamo capito che non si muore di certo per il solo virus, ed allora si potrà soffrire e morire grazie a voi a norma di legge per la miseria e la povertà. E come nei migliori regimi, la colpa sarà scaricata solo e unicamente su noi cittadini. Ci togliete la libertà e dite che ce la siamo cercata, al grido del dividi et impera. A rimetterci soprattutto i nostri figli, anime violentati in accordo con il garante, si dice, dei loro diritti e delle cesmaie varie. Sarà allora concesso il diritto alla scuola solo con un braccialetto per abituarli alla libertà vigilata, ai TSO schiavisti e ai lager virtuali, in cambio di un monopattino e di un tablet. Il tutto per assecondare gli appetiti di un capitalismo finanziario il cui motore è il conflitto di interessi, ben rappresentato dall'OMS, il cui primo finanziatore è il noto filantropo salvatore del mondo, Bill Gates. Lo sappiamo facciamo un buon lavoro con i nuovi vaccini, la sanità e la salute riproduttiva, possiamo diminuire la popolazione mondiale del 10-15% e continua, aperte virgolette, solo il genocidio può salvare il mondo. Grazie ai suoi vaccini è riuscito a sterilizzare milioni di donne in Africa, ha provocato un'epidemia di poliomielite che ha paralizzato 500.000 bambini in India e ancora oggi con il suo DTP causa più morti della stessa malattia, così come con i suoi OGM sterilizzanti progettati da Monsanto e donati così generosamente alle popolazioni bisognose. Il tutto mentre sta già pensando di distribuire il tappo quantico per il riconoscimento vaccinale e i vaccini ad mRNA come strumenti di riprogrammazione del nostro sistema immunitario, oltre a fare diversi affari anche con le multinazionali che possiedono le infrastrutture 5G negli Stati Uniti. E allora in questa tavola imbandita c'è tutto il deep state in salsa italiana. C'è la Sanofi che insieme alla già collusa Glaxo, gli amici per intendersi di Ranieri Guerra, di Ricciardi e del noto virologo che noi paghiamo a 2.000 euro ogni 10 minuti per le presentazioni in RAI. Sigla accordi con le società di medicina per l'indottrinamento di medici del futuro, facendosi beffe della loro autonomia di giudizio e del loro giuramento. Ci sono le multinazionali high-tech come la Romana Engineering, amica fra l'altro del nobile Mantoan, o la Bendy Spoons della Pisano, per il controllo e la gestione dei nostri dati sanitari rispetto dell'agenda europea ID 2020 di identificazione elettronica che ricorre proprio alla vaccinazione di massa per ottenere una piattaforma di identità digitale, tra l'altro in continuo con la gestione dei dati già avviata da Renzi all'IBM. Renzi che ricordo nel 2016 tra l'altro ha dato un più 30% al Global Fund proprio di Gates. Ci sono gli amici di Aspen come Sasson e Colau che con i suoi report di 4 pagine da 800 euro l'ora senza alcuna revisione scientifica ci detta la sua politica da generale del Bilderberg ben lontano dal campo di battaglia. Ma l'elenco è lungo, molto lungo. Ci sarebbe anche la Medtronic di Arcuri eccetera eccetera. Il contributo italiano all'Alleanza Internazionale contro il coronavirus sarà di 140 milioni di euro, di cui 120 a Gavi Alliance, proprio la no profit creata dalla Fondazione Gates, e sono solo la parte dei 7,4 miliardi di euro recuperati dalla Commissione Europea per trovare i vaccini contro il coronavirus, che serviranno proprio a quanto sopra descritto. Nulla ovviamente per la sieroterapia, che ovviamente ha il terribile effetto collaterale di costare pochissimo, tanto meno per non parlare della prevenzione, quella vera, che riguarda il nostro stile di vita, la nostra alimentazione e il nostro rapporto con l'ambiente. Il vero obiettivo di tutto questo è il controllo totale, il dominio assoluto sugli esseri umani ridotti a cavie e schiavi, violandone sovranità e libero arbitrio. Il tutto tramite i vostri inganni travestiti da compromessi politici. Allora, mentre voi spacciate il codice di Norimberga con TSA, multe, deportazioni, riconoscimento facciale e intimidazioni, avallate dallo scientismo dogmatico protetto dal nostro pluripresidente della Repubblica, che è la vera epidemia culturale di questo paese, noi fuori con i cittadini moltiplicheremo i fuochi di resistenza in modo tale che vi sia impossibile reprimerci tutti. Le chiedo gentilmente, Presidente...
Colleghi deputati, questo è un Parlamento libero dove ciascuno ha diritto di esprimere le proprie opinioni e ognuno è tenuto a rispettarle. Se non le condivide, a sua volta ha la libertà di manifestare il proprio pensiero. Basta con questo atteggiamento.
Grazie
Prego,
Presidente. Concludo. Chiedo a lei, Presidente, di farsi portavoce di un consiglio al nostro Presidente Conte. Caro Presidente Conte, la prossima volta che riceve una telefonata dal filantropo Bill Gates, la inoltri direttamente alla Corte Penale Internazionale per i crimini contro l'umanità. Diversamente ci dica come dovremmo definire l'amico avvocato che prende ordini da un criminale. Grazie.
For joining me for the third webinar, and I hope everybody has a chance to have seen the first two and to have taken a look at Andy Kaufman's brilliant webinars that he did, and have had a chance to read out loud Sleeping Beauty, a prize known as Little Briar Rose to some people. So let's get into it, and most of the questions that I've had still revolve around how do we know whether what's currently happening is caused by a virus or something else. So I thought I would go into that a little bit, because in some ways that remains the key to the kingdom, and in understanding that, we change our whole worldview. And let me just say, first of all, that I understand that I'm asking people to radically rethink the way that we have been taught and educated to see the world. Not only am I asking you to do that, I have in some ways asked myself to do that. And I can tell you that in this last month, in some ways I've learned more about medicine than I can remember in a long time. And so some of the things may be actually different than I said a month ago. So let's go over a little bit of the conceptual framework of what I'm talking about, because I think that puts this into perspective. And again, even though I've been questioning these things at least since the early 1980s, it's a process for all of us. We're just re-educating ourselves on how we see the world. And all I can say is it seems clear to me that the way we see the world right now isn't exactly working out for the best. So the way I thought I would start to do this is to just pick another example so you can, in a sense, see, I guess what you would say is the absurdity of this issue. So the example that I thought I would start with is, imagine you're an investor, and it's unfortunate that I can't see people's hands being raised or see your reaction, so I'll just have to guess. And I'm an inventor, and I invented a new device, which is a ping pong ball that can knock down brick walls. And this is a wonderful invention because now it allows us to do demolitions much easier. And so all you have to do is take this new ping pong ball and throw it at the wall, and it will knock the brick wall, or literally almost any wall, down. And that saves time and energy, and you don't have to bang walls, and you don't have to get wrecking crews and all that stuff. So I've now invented that, and I'm looking for investors for this, and all you folks out there, you're the investors. So, of course, you would probably ask me to show you something that demonstrates, because it's a bit of a weird concept, you know, one wouldn't necessarily think that a ping pong ball could knock down a brick wall. So, of course, you would ask me to demonstrate that this, in fact, is real. So, of course, I would say, sure. So here's what I would do. I would take a ping pong ball, and I would get a very small brick wall, so it's a sort of demonstration wall. And I would put the ping pong ball in a bucket of stones and rocks and maybe ice cubes and a few other things. So one ping pong ball in this big bucket. And I would throw it at the brick wall, the small brick wall, and I would demonstrate that the brick wall fell, and therefore I have now proved that the ping pong ball can knock down a brick wall. Now, I think most of you, and I won't ask for raising hands, but if you want to, you can, would say, that's not really proof, because you don't know whether it was the ping pong ball, which is unlikely, or all the rocks and bricks and or ice cubes and everything else that was in that big bucket. And so that would, for most of us, would not be sufficient proof. Now, the reason I say that is because if you want to prove that a virus causes a disease, and you take somebody's snot who's sick, and you introduce that into another person without purifying it, that's more or less exactly the same as throwing a bucket full of bricks with one ping pong ball in it, and then claiming that you've proven the ping pong ball is the reason why that it knocked down the bricks. So, okay, I'm the inventor. I can accept that that may not be proof. So what I did then, which I'm about to show you, except of course I'm not going to show you this right now, but I created a computer animation where I now show you this ping pong ball, and I shoot it out of this device, and it knocks down the computer animated brick wall. And again, I think most of us would say, I mean, that's certainly kind of graphically interesting, but that in no way constitutes proof that a real ping pong ball would break down the brick wall. So then, I'm getting a little frustrated now because I'm sensing you don't believe me. I would demonstrate that this is not your usual ping pong ball. This ping pong ball has little spikes on it. This ping pong ball has internal components, these little proteins or little things inside the ping pong ball. And these were all designed to facilitate the knocking down of brick walls. So there was a little piece inside that grabs onto the wall and sticks to it, etc. So I would describe all these different components of the ping pong ball, and then I would say, there, that's proof that this ping pong ball can knock down the brick wall. And again, of course, most of you would say, that's ridiculous. I mean, it's interesting that there's these components in it, but that doesn't prove anything. And again, there's a very analogous situation. Some people send me stuff and say, here's this New Yorker article, and it describes all these different components inside this virus, and some of them stick to this, some of them stick to that, and some of them facilitate this. By the way, you can't actually prove that all of those components came from the same virus. But even if you did, nobody would think that that's proof that this ping pong ball could knock down the brick wall. So then, again, this is getting frustrating for me as the inventor. So I say, yeah, but when we go to the all the different walls that have been knocked down, in some cases, we find certain parts of ping pong balls in the dust and the debris underneath the wall. Now, we don't find that in all of the brick walls that are knocked down, but we certainly find it in some. And not only that, when we look at the brick wall with the dust that was knocked down from the wall, we find in approximately 80% homology with the components of my new ping pong ball. And one thinks, well, that's interesting. It looks like there's something that's similar to ping pong balls. 80% is a lot of, quote, genetic homology between the dust and a ping pong ball. It's interesting. But I don't think anybody would say that's proof that this ping pong ball knocked down the walls. Especially when you consider, as Andy demonstrated in his video, while 80% homology with other ping pong balls sounds like a lot, it turns out the genetic homology between humans and chimpanzees is actually 96%. And as far as I know, nobody is saying that we're chimpanzees. So finally, I'm very frustrated because you don't seem to get it. And I say, yes, but I'm going to show you 5 experts who are tenured professors at prestigious universities. And all of them are students and studying the effect of ping pong ball allergy on knocking down brick walls. And they all say this is a very interesting new invention and they need more study, and so they need a $500 million grant to study how exactly the mechanism and the effect of this ping pong ball would be on knocking down walls. And I think at that point you would be so frustrated and you would say, Tom, all I care about, show me a video or show me in person somebody throwing the ping pong ball at a wall and the wall knocking down. And if you can't do that, I'm not interested. And in a nutshell, that's all I'm saying here. Show me a purified virus that causes disease, and as far as everybody knows, that has simply not been done. And in most realms of life, that's the only thing we would accept as any kind of credible evidence. Do germs cause disease? And just to be clear here, when I speak of germs, I'm not speaking of worms or parasites. I'm speaking only of viruses and bacteria. So again, let me give you an example to help you conceptualize this so you can really think this through. So imagine this scenario. You have some milk from a cow, and people drink the milk and then they get sick with diarrhea. And everybody wants to know why this happened. So you do a microscopic examination of the milk, and you find a bacteria called Listeria in the milk. And you know that there is at least reports that an infection, drinking Listeria bacteria, causes diarrhea in humans. So it's a very clear situation. The milk has Listeria in it. The person drinks the milk with Listeria. They get diarrhea. That's the end of the story. You think you've essentially proven the bacteria causes the disease. However, I think all of us would agree that there actually is a different way of looking at this. And the different way is maybe, which actually was the case most often with cows with Listeria, is that somehow you've improperly fed the cow. They used to do it with swill milk. They sometimes feed cows cardboard or grains or other things that are inappropriate for the cow. Sometimes you could even poison the cow with DDT or other toxins or worming medicine. And now you end up with toxins in the milk, because after all, we know that all toxins in our bodies, we know this from breast milk studies, always end up in the milk. So an alternative explanation is the Listeria are there in the milk in order to biodegrade the toxins. In other words, that is actually the function of bacteria in nature. For example, if you put stuff into your compost pile that doesn't belong there, then you'll get funky bacteria to biodegrade what you shouldn't have put in your compost. And nobody in their right mind would say your compost pile has an infection. That's very clear. The bacteria, as they always do in nature, they biodegrade that which is dead or diseased. Another example, if you poison your pond, eventually you will often get things like algae growth. Again, nobody would say that the algae is an infection. The algae isn't good for you, and the algae actually may have toxins in it itself. But the algae fundamentally, because this is the way that nature works, is biodegrading the toxins. Now, it is true that the fact of growing algae may cause other troubles, but still, I think every rational person would say the source of this problem is the poisoning of the pond or the poisoning of the cow. Now, so those are two different, equally as plausible ways of looking at it. One is the cow was perfectly fine and it happened to grow Listeria, and the other is the cow was poisoned, and the Listeria are nature's way of biodegrading the poisons. So the question is, how can we distinguish between these two? And if you think about that for a minute, and usually I would ask people, just think about that for a minute. How would you distinguish between those two? And the answer is actually very clear. The only way, and this is why I started out with the ping pong example, the only way, and I cannot emphasize this enough, the only way that any rational person would be convinced would be if you take the milk and you purify the listeria. In other words, you isolate the listeria from the milk so that you're sure that the only thing you have is listeria, not anything else from the milk, because it may be the toxins in the milk that are causing the diarrhea. Now, and then you would take this purified listeria, you would give only that to another person and see if they got sick. Now, I would only point out there is even a problem with that, potentially, because it could be that the listeria are essentially eating or biodegrading the poisons, and they may themselves be poisoned. But let's not worry about that for a minute, because I will grant you that if you could introduce a pure culture of listeria and make somebody sick, that fulfills all of Koch's postulates. So the question then, which is the part that I really had to struggle with, and only I would say in the last month have I been really convinced of this through my own research and listening and watching to so many people who've spent decades looking into this, is has that actual study ever been done? Now, most people would say it actually has, and the person who did that was named Louis Pasteur. He was the French scientist of the time in the late 1800s. He was the originator of the germ theory, essentially. Not that it really started with him, but he essentially popularized it. And he spent decades of his life doing exactly this: isolating bacteria from sick people, purifying it supposedly, giving it to normal people, and proving that germs were the source of disease. Germs in this case meaning bacteria. But the same thing applies with viruses. And he published it. He was feted by the prime ministers of Europe. He had finally proven this. The trouble is, Pasteur actually was known as a fraudster and kind of a charlatan by many people. And one of the ways we know that is because he actually, believe it or not, kept a personal diary where, on the one hand, he would publish data showing this effect of contagion, of introducing or giving animals pure germs and causing them to be sick. And meanwhile, he was writing a personal diary in which he claimed that not once in his entire career was he ever able to make an animal sick by giving them purified, isolated bacteria. Not once. He instructed his family members to never publish this diary, which apparently one of his sons or son-in-laws or stepsons or somebody who I guess didn't like him very much, he actually did publish it. And you can see how Pasteur essentially fraudulently claimed these results when nothing of the sort ever happened. One of the ways we know this is that we now know that on his deathbed, Pasteur apparently said, "The germ is nothing, the terrain is everything." And by terrain, he means, is the cow poisoned? And essentially, those studies, purifying viruses or bacteria and making other animals sick in the same way that they would normally get sick, like aerosolized viruses or drinking purified bacteria to cause diarrhea. As far as I know, and as far as the other people who looked into this has never been done. In other words, the only criteria that we would accept with the ping pong ball: throw the darn ping pong ball at the wall and see what happens. Isolate the bacteria or virus, give it to a normal person, and see what happens. We know what happens, which is basically nothing. And then number 8 is, quote, occasionally it is possible to appeal to experimental evidence, which means, I guess, occasionally it's not possible to appeal to experimental evidence, and so you just have to guess, or you just have to believe that that's what's happening. Now, I'm all for believing in things, right? And I don't want everybody to send me Bruce Lipton's book on the biology of belief. I like believing in things. I think it makes a big difference, as I'll say in a minute, what we think. But I don't want people to prove that a virus is the cause of disease because they believe it or not. And so, actually, then I decided to look into who actually was the originator of these Hill postulates, because it wasn't clear. And, this is a time where we have to be very clear about our research and all, so I put my team to work on it, and we tried to figure out who actually came up with these postulates. And at the end of the day, we came to 2 possible sources. One was Daffy Duck, and the other was Tinkerbell from Peter Pan. And it turns out I don't think Daffy Duck was around then, so it could only be Tinkerbell, which is based on the theory that if we believe hard enough, it must be true. And again, I have nothing against believing things, but I don't want us to prove that viruses cause disease without any experimental evidence, or just because we can't think of another cause. The second level is the exosome theory, which is what Andy and Sayer and others have been talking about. In other words, it turns out, and the reason you find this ping pong dust at some of the sites where demolitions have occurred, the ping pong dust would be like the exosomes. So there's a whole lot of things that create exosomes, which are actually, as I originally said, essentially excretions of our own poison cell. There are many things that cause this, including incubating your virus or SNOT, unpurified SNOT, in lung cancer cells, which is originally how they described this coronavirus. So essentially these exosomes, which look identical to viruses, can be produced by lots of different influences, including, again, as Andy demonstrated, one of the things they can be produced by is fear. And that is probably the explanation, in fact, for sure, assuredly is the explanation of why you find these viruses associated with people who are sick and poisoned and a whole lot of other things.
Right? You're 100% certain that CBS News Corporation, National, staged a fake event. They faked the news. They faked the reality and broadcasted that to all of their audience last Friday on CBS this morning.
Police are taking back the mother. They're taking the child. The mother's fighting for her children. Just been forcibly taken away, and for what? I mean, the people around. If you watch the whole video, which I'll put this, let me just keep playing it. You'll see the people are even freaking out over why they're going to watch.
That's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Look at that.
Actually, the man on the camera there saying that is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. He's right. They don't want America working. They want to bring about a fake. Everything's fake. Pandemic's fake. Right down to gosh. Let me tell you something, Prince. I gotta look at you guys straight. I know all the way from the top. Everything is staged. Alright? This whole thing is staged. It's not to say there's not a coronavirus. Sure, there's a coronavirus. You know there's 36 different strains of coronavirus. You know it's been around for more than 50 years. And you realize that if you've had any kind of flu or anything like that in the last 50 years, do you realize that you would probably test positive because the tests do not single out what virus it is? Okay? It's all fake. And I know this right out of the Pentagon. This was set up. It's a total setup. I also have word directly from the White House that Christian channels, period, are going to be shut down on YouTube. All of them are going to be shut down. This is something that's been in the making. I was told that under Obama, Hillary was working with Obama, that they were going to do it. By the way, I've also been told recently too that Trump is taking advice from Obama and Hillary both. It was a confirmation that I'd gotten from the sister. Oh gosh, there's an interview that I did with the White House correspondent. And I am blank on names right now for some reason. At any rate, she had shared with me that Obama had met secretly in the White House with Trump, and of course we did an interview together. And because of my in the White House, that yes, indeed, Trump has been meeting, taking advice from Obama as well as Hillary. But Biden is going to be the next president, and it looks like Hillary may be his running mate. I may be wrong on that. But I also know that Obama, as I said to you just recently, Obama is going to be part of that. All right. And as far as QAnon is nothing more than he's an insider in the White House. There, that's you need to be careful when you listen to that guy. I'm telling you. Her mother is already caught on what's going on. Her eyes are wide open. She realizes the danger of what's going on, the dangers of this vaccine, etc. The DARPA, and of course the hydrogel that will actually infuse in your DNA. Very, very nasty stuff. But let me just tell you this: the neighbor shared with us. She took her son in to the doctor just recently. He has asthma, so he's always having trouble with his asthmatic-related issues there. And her doctor today warned her to be very cautious when it comes to the vaccine and don't take it. By the way, whoever put up their chip, yes, you got that right. It's not just any kind of chip. When you're dealing with hydrogel, you're talking about infusing it into your DNA.
Download the COVID Safe app.
How about no, Scott, okay?
Yes, I am. Do you have anything on foot on today? What for? Just so I can do I have to show it?
Do you have any on here?
Well, do I need to show it?
It's fine. Can you say your name for me?
What for?
What for? So I'm here in regards to the protest you attended on the 10th of May.
Yeah.
Do you have any ID?
Why are you asking me?
Would you like to verify your details?
You don't need to verify my details.
Yes, we do.
No, you don't. I don't even know what you're here for.
Okay, so I was going to give a quick caution. So, okay, so my name's Sam Fletcher. You don't have
Who
to
are you? And where are you from?
Melbourne West Police Station. So listen, you don't have to do anything, but anything you say or do, maybe use evidence to understand that.
Okay, in that case, I'll say nothing. Thank
That's
you.
fine, but you can say your full name and your address.
I don't need to.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't.
It's actually an offence.
It's an offence
No,
not
it's
to
not.
say. Yes, it is.
I'm not driving the car. I'm at home. You're very close.
Christina,
You're coming right onto my property.
in regards to the offence of breaching the COVID laws, and therefore it's
I haven't breached any COVID laws.
breaching in regards to the protest you attended.
Just change your terminology. Breaching COVID directions.
Sorry?
Okay, there's a difference between directions and laws.
Okay, yeah, we're here in regards to breaching COVID directions.
And what do you want to do?
Well, we need to read something to you, ask you a few questions.
Well, you've told me that I don't need to answer any questions. I'm not prepared to answer any
Name and address is
questions.
something you must state. It's an offence not to state your name and address.
Well, under what law?
Under the Crimes Act.
Where? What section?
456.
Okay, let me look it up. Excuse me for a moment.
Before we do, we've got some information. You can look that up.
Information about what?
The information we've got to read out to you.
Are you-
What happened? Please,
Hang on.
Stop interrupting me.
Where is it against my rights to attend a protest? Where?
Listen, if you'll allow us to speak, we're about to
Go right ahead.
Please.
So on Sunday the 10th of May 2020, you were in attendance at a planned demonstration outside Parliament's house located in Spring Street.
A lawful demonstration.
Listen to proceed.
The demonstration took place between 12 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. The state of emergency was declared and it is in place until midnight, the 11th of May 2020, Public Health and Wellbeing Act.
Declared by who?
Listen.
2008, Section 198. It is
Of what?
Listen.
Can I ask a question?
The Health and Wellbeing Act of 2008.
Is that the Constitution?
It's not the Constitution. It's the
No,
Health and
exactly.
Wellbeing Act.
Exactly. Get that clear in your head.
I said Health and Wellbeing Act. I said nothing about the Constitution.
I've got no interest in the Health and Wellbeing Act.
Clause 11, subsection 4 of the Chief Health Officer's stay-at-home direction creates restrictions on
I'm at home
outdoor
right now.
gatherings.
I'm at home. I'm staying home.
Listen, exercise your right to remain silent for a sec.
It provides that
Why don't you exercise your right to remain silent?
Do you want to listen to this whole thing or not?
Not really. Can I go now?
No, just listen to this, and we need to confirm your identity, okay?
I'm not confirming my
It
identity.
provides the person must not arrange to meet with more than one person in an outdoor space unless where
That's a direction. It's not law. That's a direction.
Listen.
By attending the planned demonstration, you have committed the offence.
I have committed no offence.
Section 203, subsection 1 of the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, and as such, you will be issued an infringement notice.
You can issue whatever you like. You can issue whatever you like.
The penalty is $1,652. This will be served in the mail to you.
Okay, and I'll serve it right back. I'll serve it right back. Thank you. Don't waste my time again.